It was a warm afternoon when the last school bell rang, and students poured out into the parking lot like a wave finally breaking free. Among them was a tall, quiet 17-year-old boy named Jaden. He had just finished basketball practice and was walking home with his backpack slung over one shoulder. His shoes were worn from hours on the court, and his shirt stuck slightly to his skin from the heat. The sun was dipping low, painting the street in gold. It was just another ordinary day for him, or so he thought. He took the same route home every day, passing a small grocery store, a row of houses, and a park where kids usually played tag. He had his earphones in, listening to a song he'd heard 100 times, tapping his fingers lightly against his leg. He wasn't in a hurry. His mom worked late most evenings, and he didn't mind the quiet walk. It was his time to think, but that day something felt off. As he crossed the street near the grocery store, he noticed a police car parked a little way down the block. The lights weren't flashing, and the car just sat there. He didn't pay much attention to it at first, but when he walked past, he saw movement inside. The driver's eyes seemed to follow him. A moment later, the car pulled out slowly and began to roll behind him. Jaden's stomach tightened. He told himself not to panic. Maybe they were just patrolling. Maybe it was a coincidence. He remembered his mom's voice in his head, calm and steady. If you ever get stopped by police, stay calm, keep your hands visible, and don't argue. She'd said it more than once. At the time, he'd nodded, half listening. Now the memory made his heart beat faster. The car rolled up beside him. One of the officers, a man with a serious face and sunglasses, leaned out the window. "Hey, you there." "Stop for a second." Jaden stopped, pulling out one earphone. "Yes, sir?" "Where are you coming from?" the officer asked. His tone wasn't friendly, but not angry either. Just sharp, like he expected trouble. "From school." "Basketball practice," Jaden said. He tried to sound relaxed, though his throat felt dry. The second officer, sitting on the passenger side, looked him up and down. "What's in the bag?" "My shoes." "My uniform," Jaden replied, slowly opening his backpack to show them. He kept his hands visible like his mom had taught him. "Mind if we take a look?" the first officer asked, stepping out of the car. His boots hit the pavement hard, and Jaden noticed the way his hand hovered near his holster. Jaden hesitated, confused. "Did I do something wrong?" The officer narrowed his eyes. "We got a call about a theft at the convenience store back there. Someone said the suspect matched your description." Jaden blinked. "What description?" "Tall, dark hoodie, backpack," the officer replied flatly. Jaden looked down at himself. He was wearing a dark hoodie, yes, but so were half the guys in town. "I didn't go in that store," he said quietly. "You can ask them." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he motioned for him to set his bag on the ground. The other officer stepped out too, scanning the area. A few cars passed by slowly, curious about what was happening. Jaden's hands trembled slightly as he placed his backpack down. He wished his mom were there. She'd know what to say, how to handle this. She always knew. The first officer unzipped the bag and rummaged through it. Inside were only his basketball shoes, a notebook, and his water bottle. The officer said, glancing at his partner. "You sure you didn't stop at that store?" "Yes, sir." "I didn't," Jaden said again, a little louder this time. His voice cracked slightly, which made him angry with himself. The second officer stepped closer. "Let me see your ID." Jaden reached slowly for his wallet, remembering every word his mom had drilled into him. "Move slow. Tell them what you're doing before you do it." "I'm reaching for my wallet. It's in my back pocket," he said clearly. The officers exchanged a quick look. The first one nodded. "Go ahead." He pulled it out carefully and handed it over. The officer glanced at it, then at him again. "You live around here?" "Yes, a few blocks that way," Jaden said, pointing down the street. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of traffic in the distance. Then the radio in the police car crackled. The officer walked over to listen, mumbling something into the mic. Jaden couldn't hear what was said, but he caught the words "possible suspect" and "still under review." The second officer was still watching him closely. "You said you came from school?" "Yes, sir. Which one?" "Westbrook High." The officer nodded slowly, as if trying to decide whether he believed him. Then the first officer returned, looking uneasy. "They're saying the store clerk isn't sure about the guy's face. Just the clothes. So what now?" Jaden asked softly. He didn't mean it to sound impatient, but it did. The first officer frowned. Watch your tone, son. We're just doing our job. Jaden looked down, swallowing hard. Sorry, I just want to go home. At that moment, a car drove past, slowed, and then stopped a few yards away. A woman inside was watching the scene unfold. Jaden noticed her phone pointed toward them. The officers saw her too. One of them shifted uncomfortably. The first officer sighed, handed back Jaden's ID, and said, All right. Stay out of trouble, okay? Jaden took his wallet back, relief washing over him, but he could still feel his heart pounding. Can I go now? Yeah, the officer said, still eyeing him. Just be careful walking around here. You never know what people might think. Jaden nodded, picked up his bag, and began walking again. He didn't look back. He didn't want to, but he could feel their eyes on his back until he turned the corner. Once he was out of sight, he stopped and leaned against a tree, taking a deep breath. His hands were still shaking. It was over, but it didn't feel over. The words the officer had said, "You never know what people might think," echoed in his head. What did that even mean? He hadn't done anything wrong. He was just walking home. He pulled out his phone and saw a few missed messages from his mom. She always checked in after practice. He typed a quick reply, "I'm okay. Walking home now." He thought about telling her what happened, but hesitated. She'd be furious, not just at the officers, but at the whole idea of her son being treated like that. And she'd definitely march down to the station. He didn't want to cause trouble. He just wanted peace. As he reached the park, he sat on a bench for a few minutes to clear his head. Kids were still playing, laughing as if the world was safe and simple. He envied them for that. For them, the world still made sense. He sat there, staring at the fading sun. He thought about how easily things could have gone wrong. If he'd moved too fast, if he'd spoken too loud, if one of the officers had been a little more nervous. What then? He tried not to imagine it, but his mind did anyway. A sudden vibration in his pocket broke his thoughts. His phone buzzed with a new message. It was from his mom again. "Be home soon." "Need to talk." He smiled faintly. Her messages always sounded serious, even when they weren't. That was just her way. She was strong, strict, and always seemed to know more than anyone else in the room. Most of his friends were scared of her a little. Even before they knew what she did for a living, he understood why. She had that presence, a calm, firm energy that made people listen. As he got up and started walking again, he didn't notice that the same police car had turned onto the next street. They were still in the area, still circling. Whether it was coincidence or not, he didn't know. He kept walking, pretending not to notice, praying silently that nothing else would happen. The sky had turned pink now, the first stars barely visible. He could see his house at the end of the block, the porch light glowing faintly. That small warm light felt like safety. He sped up a little. Behind him, the low hum of the police engine returned. His stomach dropped. Not again, he thought. Not now. He turned his head slightly. The same officers were there, watching him once more. He couldn't understand why. His steps slowed. The car rolled closer. Then he heard one of them say something through the window that he couldn't make out. His pulse quickened again. The car stopped and the door opened. "Hey, you," one of the officers called. "Come here for a second." Jaden froze. He turned halfway, confused and afraid. "Me? I already talked to you." "Yeah, well, we just got an update," the officer said, stepping out again. "We need to clear something up." Jaden's heart pounded. "Sir, I told you I didn't do anything." "Just come over here," the officer said, motioning with his hand. "We'll make this quick." Jaden hesitated. He looked at the house, his house, so close he could almost run there in 10 seconds. His mom's car wasn't in the driveway yet. He wished she was home. He wished this day would just end. The officer's voice got sharper. "Now!" Jaden slowly stepped forward, his hands raised slightly in front of him. The air felt thick, heavy. Every move felt dangerous. In that tense moment, as the scene unfolded once again under the streetlight, no one noticed the black SUV turning the corner at the end of the block. Inside, a woman in a dark suit gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her eyes locked on her son and the flashing red and blue lights that had no reason to be there. She pressed harder on the gas. The SUV came to a sudden stop in front of the flashing police lights. The door opened and a woman stepped out quickly, her heels clicking against the pavement. She wasn't yelling, but her expression carried a kind of quiet power that made everyone notice her instantly. Her voice was firm but calm as she called out, "What's going on here?" The officers turned. One of them looked surprised, his hand still near his belt. The other glanced at his partner and then back at her. "Ma'am, please step back. We're in the middle of something." "I can see that," she said, walking closer. "And the person you're in the middle of something with happens to be my son." Jaden froze when he heard her voice. For a second, relief flooded through him. His mom was here, but that relief mixed quickly with fear. He knew what his mother was capable of when she saw something unjust. And he didn't want things to get worse. "Mom," he started softly, but she held up her hand slightly, telling him not to speak yet. One officer straightened his posture. "Ma'am, this is an active police stop. Please move back to the curb." She reached into her jacket slowly and pulled out her identification. "Agent Lewis, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Her tone didn't rise, but the weight behind her words made both officers pause. The second officer blinked, then looked from her to Jaden. "He's your—" "Yes," she cut him off, her tone like steel. "He's my son. And unless he's done something more than walking home from practice, I suggest you explain why 2 officers are detaining him at gunpoint." Both men froze. The street fell quiet except for the sound of a car driving by in the distance. A few neighbors who had stepped outside to watch whispered among themselves. One even took out a phone and started recording. The first officer, trying to keep his composure, said, "We received a call about a possible suspect matching his description." "Matching his description," Agent Lewis repeated slowly. "And what description is that?" The officer cleared his throat. "Tall male, dark hoodie, backpack." She took a step closer. "Do you realize how many young men in this city fit that description right now?" The officer didn't answer. His partner shifted awkwardly, glancing at the ground. Jaden's mom turned her gaze toward her son. "Did you resist? Did you raise your voice?" He shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am. I did what you told me to do. I stayed calm." She nodded once, then turned back to the officers. "So you had no evidence, no visual confirmation, and no probable cause besides a vague description. Yet you felt the need to draw your weapon on a teenager walking home?" The silence that followed was heavy. The officer's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew she was right. Agent Lewis exhaled slowly, trying to keep her anger under control. "I suggest you call your supervisor. Right now." The officer hesitated. "That's not necessary." "It is necessary," she interrupted, her tone unyielding. "Because if you don't, I will." The second officer quickly reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4B. We need a supervisor at Lincoln and Oak. Over." While they waited, the tension hung in the air like smoke. Jaden stayed quiet, watching his mom stand between him and the officers. He had seen her serious before, but never like this. It was like the calm before a storm, controlled but powerful. A few minutes later, another car pulled up. A man in uniform stepped out, his expression cautious. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked. Agent Lewis turned to him and introduced herself again. "Your officers detained my son without cause. They pointed weapons at him for walking home from school." The supervisor's eyes widened slightly as he realized who she was. "Agent Lewis," he said respectfully. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." She folded her arms. "Yes, a dangerous one." The 2 officers began talking over each other, trying to explain. They insisted they were only responding to a call, that they followed procedure, that the situation had seemed suspicious. But the supervisor raised his hand to silence them. "I think that's enough. Agent Lewis, can we speak privately for a moment?" She glanced at Jaden, who was still standing quietly nearby. "Anything you have to say, you can say here." The supervisor hesitated, then nodded. "I'll review the footage from their body cameras and the report from dispatch. If there was an error, I'll make sure it's handled properly." "Handled properly," she repeated, her tone soft but sharp. "I'll be following up on that. I want copies of the body cam recordings, and I'll be filing a written complaint." The supervisor nodded again, clearly uncomfortable. "Understood." Agent Lewis turned to her son. "Get in the car, sweetheart." Jaden obeyed immediately, slipping into the passenger seat of her SUV. His hands were still trembling slightly. He watched through the window as his mom spoke for a few more minutes with the officers. Her face didn't change, calm, cold, professional. Finally, she got in the driver's seat and started the engine. For a few blocks, neither of them said a word. The sound of the tires on the road filled the silence. Jaden stared out the window, the events of the last hour replaying in his mind. The flashing lights, the shouting, the fear, it all seemed unreal now. After a while, his mom said quietly, "Are you okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think so." She glanced at him. "You did everything right. I'm proud of you." Jaden didn't answer at first. His throat felt tight. Finally, he said, "I thought they were going to arrest me. For nothing." Her hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I know." He turned to look at her. "How did you know where I was?" "I was on my way home when I got a text from you," she said. "Then one of my colleagues called me. They'd seen a local alert about an incident involving a male suspect. Something told me to check. When I heard the location, I knew." Jaden looked back out the window. "You saved me." She shook her head. "You saved yourself. You stayed calm. That's what matters." They drove in silence again for a while. The neighborhood lights flickered by one after another. Eventually, she pulled the car into their driveway and turned off the engine. Neither of them got out right away. Jaden finally said, "They didn't even believe me when I told them I was coming from practice." His mom sighed. "Some people see what they want to see. It's not fair, but it's the truth." He nodded slowly, staring at his hands. "You always said to be careful." "I didn't think it would actually happen." Her voice softened. "That's why I tell you. Not to scare you, but to prepare you." He looked up at her. "Do you think they'll get in trouble?" She paused. "Maybe, maybe not. But what matters is accountability. I'll make sure their department knows this can't keep happening." Jaden leaned back in his seat, exhausted. "I wish I didn't have to think about stuff like this." She reached over and touched his shoulder gently. "I know, but you're strong. You handled yourself better than most grown men would." He smiled faintly, though his eyes were tired. "I just wanted to get home." She smiled back a little sadly. "Now you are." They finally went inside. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Jaden dropped his bag by the door and sank into a chair. His mom set her keys on the counter, then poured them both a glass of water. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, studying his face. "You sure you're okay?" she asked again. "Yeah, I keep thinking about what could have happened if you didn't show up." She looked down for a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to think about that." He watched her carefully. For the first time that night, she didn't look like the strong agent everyone respected. She just looked like his mom, worried, tired, and scared of what almost happened. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm okay," he said softly. She nodded, squeezing back. "I know." They sat there in silence for a while, both lost in their thoughts. Outside, the neighborhood had gone still. The flashing lights were gone, but the memory of them lingered in the air like a shadow that wouldn't fade. Later, as Jaden got ready for bed, he heard his mom on the phone in her room. Her voice was quiet but firm as she spoke to someone from the police department. She was calm, professional, yet underneath that tone was a layer of anger that only a mother could carry. When she finally hung up, she walked into his room. He was already under the blanket, staring at the ceiling. "Try to get some rest," she said softly. "I will," he whispered. She hesitated at the door. "You did good today. Remember that. Good night, Mom." "Good night." She turned off the light and closed the door halfway, leaving a sliver of hallway glow in the room. Jaden lay there for a long time, his mind replaying the scene over and over. The red and blue lights, the fear, the way his mom had stepped in like a shield. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. His mom wasn't just his mother. She was his protector, his defender, and the reason he made it home safe that night. The morning light came quietly through the blinds, soft and golden. Jaden woke up slower than usual, his body heavy with the kind of tiredness that didn't come from sleep, but from everything that had happened the night before. For a moment he thought maybe it had been a dream, but then he remembered the flashing lights, the officers' voices, his mom's sharp tone as she stood between them. It had all been real. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. The house smelled like coffee and toast, and he could hear the faint sound of the news playing from the kitchen. He got dressed and walked down the hallway. His mom was already there, sitting at the table, her laptop open in front of her. Her hair was tied back neatly, and there was a half-eaten piece of toast on her plate. She looked calm, but her eyes were focused and alert. She looked up and smiled softly. "Morning, sweetheart." "How'd you sleep?" He shrugged. "Okay, I guess." She closed her laptop halfway and studied his face. You sure? He nodded, but his eyes told a different story. She didn't push him. Instead, she poured another cup of coffee and set it in front of herself, tapping her fingers lightly against the mug. Do you have school today? She asked. Yeah. I was thinking I'd walk with Malik. Her eyes flickered slightly. You sure you want to walk? Jaden hesitated. Yeah, it's fine. It's daytime. I'll be careful. She gave a small nod but didn't look convinced. Okay, just text me when you get there. He smiled faintly. I always do. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The news anchor's voice filled the background, talking about traffic, the weather, and something about a new community meeting with the local police department. Agent Lewis glanced toward the screen when she heard the word police. She turned up the volume. And following recent reports of mistaken identity incidents, the department says they'll review all procedures related to youth stops and field questioning. Jaden froze. He looked at his mom. You think that's about? She didn't answer right away. Maybe. Incidents like that don't stay quiet for long. He frowned. People were recording last night. You think someone posted it? Her lips tightened slightly. If they did, it's already out there. But that's not your fault. He leaned against the counter. I don't want people seeing me like that. I didn't do anything wrong. I know, she said gently. But sometimes the truth reaches more people when it's seen, not told. He nodded slowly, trying to understand. She stood up, gathered her papers, and slipped them into her bag. I'm heading into the office later. I have a meeting first. You be careful, okay? I will, he said again. She touched his shoulder briefly before heading out. He watched her go, wondering what she planned to do. He knew his mom wasn't one to let things slide. When something wrong happened, she faced it head-on no matter who was involved. By the time Jaden reached school, people were already whispering. He noticed a few kids glancing at their phones, then at him. He felt his stomach twist. As he walked through the hallway, Malik jogged up beside him. Yo, Malik said quietly. You okay? Jaden frowned. Yeah, why? Malik lowered his voice. You haven't seen it? Seen what? Malik held up his phone. There on the screen was a short video. It showed the moment the officers stopped Jaden, their voices echoing under the flashing lights. The angle was shaky, filmed from across the street. A few seconds later, the SUV pulled up and his mom stepped out. Her badge caught the light and her calm but firm voice filled the recording. The title read, Cop Stop Teen, then his mom shows up with an FBI badge. Jaden's chest felt tight. Who posted that? Some lady from the neighborhood, Malik said. It's all over social media. People are sharing it everywhere. He didn't know how to feel. Embarrassed, angry, relieved, it was all tangled together. Great, he muttered. Now everyone knows, Malik shrugged. At least they know you didn't do anything wrong. That part was true. Still, Jaden hated attention. By the end of the day, teachers were being extra kind to him. Classmates were curious, and even the principal called him into the office to check if he was all right. He just nodded and said he was fine. Inside, though, he wasn't sure. While Jaden was at school, Agent Lewis drove to the police department. The front desk officer greeted her politely, though she could tell he recognized her name. She'd already filed a formal complaint the night before, and now she was here to make sure it wasn't brushed aside. A man in a gray suit came out of an office and extended his hand. Agent Lewis, I'm Captain Richards. I believe you requested a follow-up meeting. Yes, she said, shaking his hand firmly. I'd like to review the body cam footage and discuss your officer's conduct. He nodded and gestured for her to follow him down the hall. They entered a small conference room with a large monitor on the wall. Another officer was already there setting up the video. As the footage played, Agent Lewis kept her arms crossed, her face unreadable. The recording showed exactly what she'd expected. The car following her son, the stop, the questioning, and the moment one of the officers drew his weapon. Even knowing how it ended, it was hard to watch. When it reached the part where she appeared, the captain quietly paused the video. As you can see, Agent Lewis, the situation didn't escalate beyond verbal commands, thankfully. Thankfully, she echoed. Because I arrived, he cleared his throat. We'll be conducting an internal review. The officers involved will be temporarily reassigned pending further evaluation. That's not enough, she said evenly. You need to retrain your entire department on what reasonable suspicion actually means. My son could have been hurt or worse because they assumed he was a suspect based on vague information. The captain looked uneasy. I understand your frustration, but we're taking this seriously. She leaned forward slightly. I'm not frustrated, Captain. I'm determined. There's a difference. He nodded, realizing she wasn't here just as a parent. She was here as someone who understood the system inside out. We'll make sure this is handled appropriately, he said. I'll hold you to that, she replied, standing up. Later that evening, she sat in her car outside Jaden's school, waiting for him to come out. He spotted her immediately and climbed into the passenger seat. Hey, she said softly. How was your day? He sighed. Weird, everyone's seen the video, she nodded. I figured. It's getting attention online. Some people are calling for an investigation. Jaden looked at her. Do you think that's good or bad? She thought about it for a moment. Both. Good, because it starts conversations. Bad, because sometimes people forget there's a real person behind the story. He leaned back against the seat. I don't want to be a story. She looked at him, her expression softening. You're not a story. You're my son. That's what matters, he gave a small smile. Thanks, Mom. They drove home in silence for a while, the soft sound of the radio filling the space between them. At one stoplight, she glanced at him and said, I met with the police captain today. They're investigating. Do you think anything will change? Her voice was quiet but steady. I hope so. It takes more than one complaint to fix a system. But every step matters. Jaden turned to look out the window. I wish it didn't happen at all. So do I, she said. But maybe something good can come out of it. When they got home, Jaden went to his room. He opened his phone again and saw dozens of messages. Friends, classmates, even strangers thanking him for staying calm or saying how proud they were of his mom. He scrolled for a while, then put it down. He didn't want praise. He just wanted things to feel normal again. His mom knocked on his door a few minutes later. Can I come in? Yeah, he said. She stepped in and sat on the edge of the bed. There's something I want you to understand. What happened wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. But moments like that remind us how important it is to speak up. Not everyone gets the chance to. He looked at her carefully. You think that's why it happened? To make a point? No, she said softly. I think it happened because people make mistakes. But what we do after those mistakes, that's what matters. He nodded slowly. You're going to make sure they learn from it, right? She smiled faintly. You know me, he smiled back, feeling a small spark of comfort. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about how quickly things could change, how a normal walk home could turn into something people all over the internet were talking about. He didn't want to be defined by that moment, but he also couldn't ignore what it revealed about the world around him. Down the hall, his mom sat at her desk, typing up notes for her report. Her lamp cast a soft glow across the papers. She was tired, but she kept going. She wasn't just doing it for her son. She was doing it for every parent who feared that same phone call, for every kid who just wanted to walk home safely. As the house grew quiet, a feeling of resolve settled between them, silent, strong, and unspoken. The storm hadn't ended yet, but together they were ready for whatever came next. The street was still tense even though the shouting had stopped. The blue and red lights from the police car flickered over the faces of everyone standing around. People had gathered from nearby houses, whispering, holding up their phones, trying to understand what had just happened. Jaden stood frozen, his chest rising and falling fast. His hands were still in the air, and he could feel his heart pounding in his ears. His mother stood a few feet in front of him, calm but sharp-eyed, the kind of calm that came from years of handling situations far worse than this. The two officers who had stopped him now looked uneasy. Their tone had changed the moment she flashed her badge. One of them tried to say something, but his voice came out shaky. Ma'am, we were just... She didn't let him finish. You were just what? She said quietly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. You were just pointing your gun at an unarmed teenager? You were just yelling at my son while he was trying to explain himself? The officer swallowed hard. You thought wrong, she cut in. And if you'd taken 2 seconds to check your facts instead of assumptions, we wouldn't be standing here right now. The crowd went silent. The second officer stepped back, glancing at the people recording. Jaden's mother turned to her son. Are you okay? She asked softly. He nodded, though his throat felt dry. I didn't do anything. he whispered. I know, she said, her eyes softening for a moment. You don't have to explain. She faced the officers again. I want your supervisor here. Now. The one nearest to the car quickly grabbed his radio and started speaking into it, his tone low and nervous. A few people in the crowd murmured, some shaking their heads. It wasn't every day they saw an FBI agent step into a neighborhood stop like this. While they waited, Jaden's mother asked for the officers' names and badge numbers. Her tone stayed professional, but her hands were steady and sure, like she'd done this 100 times before. She took a small notepad from her pocket and wrote down everything, every detail. You're recording this too, right? She asked the nearest bystander. The woman nodded, still holding up her phone. Yes, ma'am. I got it all. Good, she said simply. A few minutes later, a dark sedan pulled up. The police supervisor stepped out, buttoning his jacket as he approached. He looked serious but calm, like someone who already knew this wasn't going to be easy. He recognized her instantly. Agent Lewis, he said, his voice polite but careful. Didn't expect to see you out here tonight. Neither did I, she replied. But apparently your officers thought it was a good idea to detain my son at gunpoint for walking home. The supervisor glanced at the officers. Is that true? One of them stammered. We got a call about a suspect near the store, sir. He matched the description. We thought, you thought, she repeated slowly, her voice cold now. That's your defense? You thought? The supervisor looked uneasy. Let's step aside and talk, Agent Lewis. We'll handle this properly. I'll stand right here, she said firmly. My son doesn't need to be hidden behind cars or treated like a problem. You can handle it here. The supervisor sighed, nodding slightly. All right, let's clear this up. He motioned for the officers to lower their voices and began questioning them quietly, trying to understand what led up to the stop. The words mistaken identity floated through the air, followed by unclear report and possible confusion. Jaden stood near the sidewalk, trying to process everything. He could still feel his legs shaking, but now it was from adrenaline, not fear. He looked around at the people still filming, realizing this moment might not stay private. His mother glanced at him again, and he caught her eyes. For the first time that night, he saw how tired she looked beneath her calm expression. She had spent her life training for dangerous missions. But this, defending her own son on their own street, felt heavier than any case she'd ever worked. After a few tense minutes, the supervisor came back. Agent Lewis, he said carefully, it appears there was a report of a robbery nearby. The description was vague. Young male, dark hoodie, backpack. It seems your son was mistaken for the suspect. She stared at him, expression unreadable. And you think that excuses this? No, he said quickly. It doesn't. I'm going to file a report myself. I assure you this will be reviewed. You'll need to do more than review, she said evenly. This isn't just about my son. How many other young men have to deal with this before someone changes how these calls are handled? The supervisor didn't answer right away. The silence spoke for him. Finally, he said, You're right. I'll make sure this goes to internal affairs, and I'm sorry for what happened. She nodded slightly, though her expression didn't soften. I'll hold you to that. Turning back to Jaden, she said, We're done here. As they walked toward her car, the crowd began to disperse. Some people called out words of support. Others just watched quietly, uncertain what to say. Jaden kept his eyes on the ground, feeling both relieved and embarrassed by all the attention. When they got inside the car, silence filled the space for a long time. The sound of the engine starting broke it. His mother's hands were still steady on the wheel, but he could sense how tightly she was gripping it. Mom, he said softly. I know, she said. I thought the same thing. He looked out the window. They didn't even ask me anything at first. They just told me to stop, like I was already guilty. Her voice stayed calm, but there was sadness beneath it. That's why I've always told you to stay calm, to listen, to keep your hands visible. It's not fair, but it's what keeps you safe. Jaden turned to her. But I was safe because you showed up. She didn't answer right away. She focused on the road, the flashing lights fading behind them. I showed up this time, she said quietly. But I won't always be there. That's why you have to remember everything I've taught you. Every word. He nodded slowly, but his chest still felt heavy. As they drove, the tension slowly eased. The neighborhood streets passed by quietly, the soft hum of the tires on pavement filling the silence. Jaden rested his head against the window, thinking about how close things had come to going wrong. His mother glanced at him once in a while, checking if he was okay. The calm expression she'd worn outside was beginning to fade. Beneath it, anger and fear were mixing with exhaustion. She had seen many things in her career, but this, watching her own child treated like a suspect, had shaken something deep inside her. When they finally pulled into their driveway, she turned off the engine and sat still for a moment. The air felt thick, heavy with everything unspoken. She took a slow breath. "You did everything right tonight," she said softly. "You stayed calm. You didn't argue. You didn't reach for anything. That's what saved you." Jaden didn't feel proud. "But I shouldn't have to think about saving myself just for walking home," he said quietly. Her eyes glistened for a moment, though she blinked it away. "You're right," she whispered. "You shouldn't." They sat there a little longer before finally stepping out. The night air felt cool and the sound of crickets filled the space between them. As they walked to the front door, Jaden's mother looked up at the stars, her jaw set with determination. She knew this wouldn't be the last time she'd have to stand up for him, or for someone else's child. Inside, she placed her badge and gun on the counter, as she always did after work. But tonight it felt different. The badge didn't feel like a symbol of power. It felt like a reminder of responsibility. Jaden went to his room quietly, but before closing the door, he looked back at her. "Thanks, Mom," he said softly. She gave a small nod. "Always." The house fell silent again, but the night outside still carried the echoes of what had happened. The lights, the tension, the fear, and the quiet strength that had turned it all around. Neither of them would forget it. The next morning came quietly. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting soft lines across the living room floor. The house was still, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. Jaden sat at the kitchen table with a cup of orange juice, staring at nothing in particular. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bright red and blue lights flashing, the officer's hand on his gun, his mother's voice cutting through the noise. It replayed like a loop he couldn't turn off. His mother walked in, dressed in her usual work clothes, neat, pressed, serious. But her eyes looked tired, softer than usual. She stopped when she saw him and gave a small nod. "Morning." "Morning," he said quietly. She poured herself some coffee and sat across from him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. It wasn't awkward, just heavy, the kind of silence that carried too much inside it. Finally, she said, "How are you feeling?" "I don't know," he admitted. "It's weird. I keep thinking about it. Like if you hadn't shown up." He stopped himself, not wanting to finish that sentence. She reached across the table and touched his hand. "But I did," she said softly. "And you're okay." He looked up at her. "I know, but it's not fair. I wasn't doing anything wrong." Her expression turned thoughtful. "You're right. It's not fair, and it never should have happened. But that's why we keep pushing for change. Why we keep showing up, speaking up, not backing down." He nodded, but his eyes were still clouded. "Do you think they'll actually do something about it?" "The police, I mean." She took a sip of coffee before answering. "Maybe, maybe not. But I'm not leaving it alone. There will be a report. And it won't disappear this time." The quiet confidence in her voice made him feel a little safer. She wasn't just saying it, she meant it. Later that day, she went to work. Jaden stayed home trying to focus on his homework, but failing. Every sound outside made him tense. A car passing by, footsteps on the sidewalk. It all made his chest tighten for a second before he reminded himself he was safe. In the afternoon, his phone buzzed. A friend had sent him a link to a video. It was the recording from last night, the one the bystander had taken. He hesitated before pressing play. The video started shaky, but the scene was clear. Him standing with his hands in the air, the officers shouting, then his mother stepping in. Watching it from the outside made his stomach twist. He could hear people murmuring in the background, someone gasping when the gun was drawn, and then his mother's firm, steady voice cutting through all of it. He watched it to the end, then turned off the screen. For a while he just sat there. Then another notification popped up. The video was spreading fast. People. That evening, when his mother came home, he showed her. She watched silently, her expression unreadable. When it ended, she took a deep breath. "It's going to get attention," she said. "Maybe a lot. Are you okay with that?" He shrugged. "I guess. If it helps people understand what happens out there, maybe it's good. She gave a small smile. You're braver than you think, you know that? He smiled faintly. I had a good teacher. Over the next few days, the video spread even more. Local reporters tried to reach out. Some neighbors came by to show support, dropping off food or letters. Others just gave quiet nods when they saw them on the street. One evening, a small local station asked to interview his mother. She agreed, but only if Jaden was okay with it. He said yes. They filmed it in their living room. The reporter asked questions: what had happened, how she felt, what she hoped would change. She spoke calmly, her voice steady, her words simple but strong. This isn't just about my son, she said. It's about every child who's been stopped for no reason. It's about every parent who lives with that fear. My badge doesn't erase what happened. It only proves how easily it can happen to anyone. Jaden watched her as she spoke, realizing just how powerful her voice was. She didn't sound angry. She sounded determined. It wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. After the interview aired, more messages came in, some from people thanking her for speaking up, others sharing their own stories. Jaden read some of them late at night, realizing how many others had gone through similar things. It made him sad but also strangely connected. He wasn't alone in what he'd felt. A week later, the police department released a statement. They apologized publicly, saying the officers had been placed under review and that new training procedures were being discussed. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. His mother told him small steps mattered too. Change doesn't happen in one day, she said, but it starts somewhere. One evening, they sat on the porch together. The air was cool and the sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink. For the first time in a while, things felt calm. Jaden leaned back against the chair. You think people will forget about it soon? He asked. Some will, she said honestly. But not everyone. And you won't, that's what matters, he nodded slowly. I don't want to forget. I just want it to mean something. It already does, she said. You handled yourself with courage. You stayed calm even when things were unfair. That's strength. And you showed people that the way you respond matters even when others are wrong. He smiled a little. You make it sound easy, she chuckled softly. It's not. But that's life. You keep standing even when it's hard. The sun dipped lower and the first stars began to appear. A soft breeze moved through the trees. It felt peaceful in a way he hadn't felt since that night. Later, when he went inside, he noticed his backpack sitting by the door, the same one the officers had questioned him about. He picked it up and turned it over in his hands, realizing it was just a simple bag, but it had almost been seen as something else entirely. He took out his notebook and started writing. Not homework, not messages, just thoughts. Everything he remembered, everything he felt. It wasn't for anyone else to read. It was just his way of letting it go, piece by piece. His mother passed by his room and saw him writing. She didn't interrupt, just smiled quietly and closed the door halfway. She knew what he was doing. She'd done the same thing when she was young, writing to make sense of things that didn't make sense. Days turned into weeks. Life started to feel normal again. Jaden went back to school. Some classmates asked about the video, but he didn't want to talk much about it. He just said, yeah, that was me, and changed the subject. What mattered most was that he was there, walking through the halls, living his life. One afternoon after school, his mother surprised him by picking him up early. I thought we could use some time away, she said. They drove to the beach about an hour from home. When they got there, they walked along the shore. The sound of the waves and the smell of salt filled the air. Jaden kicked off his shoes and let the water touch his feet. For the first time in a long while, he felt light again. His mother walked beside him, her hands in her pockets. You know, she said quietly. That night could have gone very differently, but it didn't. And I think part of that is because you stayed calm, and part of it is because people cared enough to record, to speak up. He looked at her. And because you were there, she smiled softly. That too. But one day I won't have to be there. You'll handle it, and you'll help others do the same. That's how change lasts. He didn't say anything for a moment. The wind brushed against his face, and he felt the warmth of her words sink in. I hope so, he said finally. As the sun began to set, they stood there together, watching the horizon glow. The waves kept rolling in, washing away footprints in the sand, but the memory of what they'd faced wasn't something the ocean could erase. It had changed them both. not with bitterness, but with quiet strength. When they finally headed back to the car, Jaden glanced one last time at the water. It looked endless, peaceful, and full of possibility. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He'd carry this lesson with him wherever he went. Because even in moments of fear, there was power in truth. And even when the world seemed unfair, there was hope in standing tall together. And sometimes the strongest thing you could do was simply